Kamal, there's loads of headlines around the election campaign, as you'd imagine.
Diane Abbott, day 2. What's going on with the left?
The left is eating itself, Kamal, so we're going to be discussing that. We're also going to be discussing reforms offering a migrant tax on business.
Bit tricky.
Slightly curious. But we thought, didn't we, that the whole theme of this week has been, how does the left solve its problem with the left, and
how does the right solve its problem with the right?
So that's what we're going to be delving into in today's podcast.
Welcome to The Daily Tea with me, Kamal Ahmed.
And me, Camilla Tominey.
So we'll have a look at the Conservatives and Reform later in the podcast. But let's catch up with what's been happening with Labour and its problem with the left and its candidates. Diane Abbott's been on the steps of Hackney Town Hall.
I have campaigned over 40 years for the Labour Party. I have also campaigned for 40 years for equalities. That's right. I've spoken up on race, I've spoken up on gender, I've spoken up on gay rights. And it is as if the party leadership is throwing all that in my face. Well, I am here to say that I will continue to speak up. I will continue to struggle, and by any means possible, I will be the candidate for Hackney North and
This sparked a bit of confusion, didn't it, Kamal? Because she's saying she's going to be the candidate for Hackney North. That's the seat she's served since 1987. She's got a 33,000 majority there. But she didn't clarify whether it was going to be as an independent or for Labour. It's looking increasingly unlikely it's going to be for Labour. As we explained yesterday, she had the whip removed, which means she was removed from the Labour Party. She then had it restored. This was all over that row about anti-Semitism. So even though she's had the Labour whip restored, she suggested that she's been banned from standing for Labour as part of Starmer's purge of Corbynistas.
It's not clear yet, actually, whether she will stand, as you say, for Labour. Angela Rayner, the Deputy Leader of Labour, has said that she doesn't see any reason why she shouldn't be standing. A group of the main unions that, of course, fund the Labour Party and support the Labour Party have said that Diane Abbott should be allowed to stand for Labour on July the 4th. And Keir Starmer, at the moment, has said that no decision has been taken. For any political party during a campaign, what do they want? They want control of what the media is talking about as far as possible. This has been a subject that Labour would prefer the media, the public weren't talking about, and would prefer them to be talking about the NHS, the economy, whatever it might be that Labour is campaigning on. So we have now had 2 days of this. We are only a few days. Next Tuesday, Keir Starmer will have, or the Labour Party will have to make the final decisions on who their candidates are. I would be surprised if Diane Abbott is stopped from standing as a Labour MP, given what Angela Rayner has said, unless Keir Starmer is going to go against his deputy leader.
Let's listen to what Angela Rayner said.
I don't see any reason why Diane Abbott can't stand as a Labour MP going forward. She's been cleared as part of an investigation. That is a process. I'm not involved in that process. And for me, I just see that if she wants to stand, then I don't see any reason why she can't stand.
That was Angela Rayner speaking to ITV. Keir Starmer was speaking to reporters during Labour's campaign launch in Wales today, where he was asked if he is blocking left-wing candidates from running for the party.
No, I've said repeatedly over the last 2 years as we've selected our candidates that I want the highest quality candidates. That's been the position for a very long time. The situation in relation to Diane Abbott is that no decision has been taken to bar.
What I'm trying to work out from all this, Kamal, is whether it is harming or helping Starmer's campaign with a view to trying to attract the moderate undecideds. Because on one hand, you could say it's wiped the NHS announcements off the front pages. It's wiped anything Rachel Reeves has been saying about Tory economic incompetence off the front pages. But at the same time, it's working because our readers quite like this. Our readers want Diane Abbott, like Jeremy Corbyn, who they absolutely hate, not to stand as Labour candidates. So this whole idea of purging the party of people who have been linked to anti-Semitism is working. I mean, he's got cut through on that.
I think for Keir Starmer, a day of this is fine. Day after day of this is more dangerous, because as long as you're not what is described in campaigning terms, controlling the narrative, that's not a good space to be, because you're not sure where it's going to go. And as I said, they're getting themselves a little bit boxed in. Is Keir Starmer really going to go against his deputy leader and say, no, Diane Abbott shouldn't stand? I don't think he will do that. So my assumption at this stage is that Diane Abbott will stand when they have the final reckoning on their MPs list next Tuesday. Well, that means that for Telegraph readers or for people who want to see this idea of a purge, it won't be satisfied. So Labour will get themselves trapped. Yes, Corbyn is standing as an independent, but Diane Abbott looks like she will stand as a Labour MP. And just the final thing is, it gets people talking about an area that is always toxic for the Labour Party, which is this idea of, is it socialist?
Well, this whole issue of is it socialist, who's a socialist, who isn't a socialist, that's been debated all week. We've got Keir Starmer saying he is a socialist. We've got the likes of Rachel Reeves and Darren Jones, who both work on the economy brief for Labour, saying that they aren't or refusing to commit. Shall we listen to Sexy Jezza last night at his campaign launch? Because he's obviously running in Islington North as an independent. He was speaking to reporters last night to the strains of Dolly Parton's 9 to 5, which I thought was fun.
Excellent. Also, he's also picked up Rishi Sunak's love of country music, which is obviously a joy to hear.
She has every right to be the MP for Hackney North, and she has my full support.
Keir Starmer says he's a socialist, is he?
Well, there are many people who have different definitions of socialism. Mine is from each according to their needs.
But is he trying to purge the left?
It looks like it, but as I'm disturbed at the way Diane has been treated, you can see what happened with me. But there has to be a voice for justice, for peace and socialism in our society. And you've seen the message here tonight.
You came close to saying it was an assault.
I'm not sure whether Dolly would necessarily be a Corbyn fan, by the way. I'm not sure what she thinks about that music being used. Maybe it's completely beyond both of their control. But the Corbyn factor in this idea of Starmer's socialism once again plays into the Tories' hands, doesn't it? Because they keep on saying to the electorate, who is this bloke really? You know, is he a Blairite? Is he a Corbynista? He propped Corbyn up for 4 years. What are his true colours? But on the other hand, maybe all of this kind of strange flip-floppery on the issue of how socialist he actually is means that the electorate gets the message that maybe he is more moderate than he seems.
This type of issue doesn't work for leaders of the Labour Party if it plays into a public suspicion that the leader of the Labour Party is to the left of them. If you look at how Neil Kinnock was framed during the 1992 election and in the 1987 election, it was this idea of, yes, they've reinvented a bit of Labour, but actually they're still the same old Labour that will run out of your money. That worked because the public believed it to be true. It didn't work with Tony Blair. They tried to make Tony Blair, the Conservatives tried to make Tony Blair out as someone who would reveal his true self when he got into power. That didn't work as an argument because the public did not believe and had little evidence that Blair was actually a left-winger. He had got rid of Clause 4, the means of production and ownership part of the Labour constitution. So the public thought, well, no, hang on a minute, there's no evidence that Blair is actually a left-winger. Now, when you come to Keir Starmer, it is different because, of course, as we've discussed so many times on the Daily Tea, he did stand on a ticket for the leadership of the Labour Party, which does align much more closely with Jeremy Corbyn. So the public are looking for evidence. They have a big chunk of evidence. Who was Keir Starmer in 2020 when he became leader of the Labour Party? And now they've got this issue being raised, which is why it becomes more important for Labour to close this down, because the public can see or believe or perceive there's some element of truth.
But where will it leave this theory that Tony Blair only won successive premierships because he was a Tory in red clothing, if Keir Starmer ends up winning an election on the back of pretty socialist pledges. That then blows apart this idea that only moderate Labour can win.
I think he will win because the public believe more readily that he's actually a moderate who played being left and is going to win, rather than he's actually left-wing and he slightly fooled us, but we don't mind that. So I think most polling shows that the centre of gravity for the British public is slightly centre-right. All in, if you put the whole adult voting population into one big bucket, where do they roughly net out in terms of their left-right? Rather old-fashioned phrases, I know, Camilla, and we'll get onto a bit of this, I think, particularly when we discuss the Conservatives. But where do they net out left-right? They are slightly centre leaning to the right. And in the end, that is where you win. You win from the centre, and a very light blue blush on that.
But then Thatcher wasn't winning from the centre, was she?
But then in 1979, the public wanted huge change. I mean, there's a very different set of judgments by the public. By that stage, a whole method of government had seemed to have failed, which was this idea of the triumvirate between the unions, business and government that had been seen during the 1970s to change. So what people wanted in 1979 was a complete change. It isn't the same argument, I think, that we're having now.
You know, when we've spoken in the past about the difficulty facing Rishi Sunak, in that he has to appeal to both Conservatives that like Nigel Farage and Conservatives that hate him, is it the case, do you think, that Starmer is having to appeal to left-wingers that both love Tony Blair and left-wingers who hate him?
I don't think it's quite the same. Farage is more of a polarising figure to me for people who may vote either Conservative or Labour. Much more polarising than Blair was. He became more polarising once he had stopped being the Prime Minister. So I don't think it's quite the same comparison. What Keir Starmer needs to do is get soft Tories, if you might describe them like that, over the line to trust him. And he has, as we've discussed before, jettisoned anything that he thinks will get in the way of Starmer's journey to number 10. And that means being no real policy announcements, all about reassurance, and I want to serve. His danger, though, is that the public are still concerned and want to be reassured about what he was saying only 4 years ago.
But if we think that the moderate approach can win, how do you then, and I accept that, because nobody's denying Blair's astonishing legacy in the history, not just of Labour politics, but British politics in general. However, he is now, according to YouGov, the least popular Labour politician in history. Okay, his approval rating is worse than Brown's, Kinnock's, everyone's. Our readers absolutely hate his guts. Can I give you some examples? They blame him for, funny enough, we discussed this yesterday, the rise in Mickey Mouse degrees. They blame him for uncontrolled immigration. It should be noted that Robert Jenrick and Neil O'Brien, when they did that film about immigration, what the Tories should do to solve it, made that point, and the statistic is pretty startling. In the 25 years until 1997, net migration was at 61,000. In the 25 years subsequently, it rose to 5.9 million. That's 100 times as much immigration as we had before. So the legacy of Blair, one might imagine, might actually put off soft Tories.
I wonder whether people really think about him anymore, to be honest. I think you're right that the polls turned pretty aggressively against him once he had stopped being Prime Minister. But he did win 3 elections. He has been the most successful Labour leader ever and the longest serving Labour Prime Minister. So I'm not sure Blair is really playing in this election. He's playing in one way, which is a slightly different thing, but we can come on to that maybe a bit later.
The Tories should weaponise this, because you and I both know that Tony Blair is in the background pulling some strings. We were talking about this earlier. His institute has now become pretty powerful. It's employing hundreds of people. We know that he's in the ear of the Starmer administration. The Tories should weaponise this and say they should do the thing like they did with Tony Blair, being in George W. Bush's pocket. They should be saying, actually, Blair's behind all this. Because I genuinely think that would be a good scare tactic to put off righties from going for Labour.
The Conservatives, for years and years and years, thought they could scare the British public about who really Tony Blair is, and they've done it over and over again, and it's never worked. So I would say if they were thinking,
he's less popular now than he was
in polls, but people vote for him because to them he looks like a prime minister, and they could try making this into, well, as you describe it, weaponising Tony Blair. I don't think that would work because you'd have to be relatively obsessional about Blair to still have a real sort of hatred of him now, because I think, though, you raise a really, really important point, which is the Tony Blair Institute and what role that will have in the Starmer government if he's successful on July the 4th. I think there are two think tanks which would have, some influence after the next election if Labour win. I think the Tony Blair Institute is one. I think another is the Resolution Foundation.
Yes.
They've both got very powerful links to Labour. One of our producers in our discussion earlier today said we should really look at think tanks and these places that really do motivate a lot of policy discussion and things. So we'll get onto that at another time.
Shall we talk in a moment about the Conservatives? The right is also eating itself, let's be honest, Kamal, it's ever been thus. And also reforms offering to the electorate a migrant tax on workers.
And also stick with us because we've got some very funny reactions to Rishi Sunak's love of Star Wars. So we spoke about the left eating itself. Let's get on to the right, possibly having a bit of a meal of its own, but also reform and the policy they've just announced on immigration. We had Richard Tice, the leader, and Nigel Farage, who I think is honorary president. Is
Correct,
that right, Camilla?
Yes.
Honorary president of reform. And they have laid out a policy on immigration, which is that they would introduce a migrant tax, which would force employers to pay a higher national insurance rate on foreign workers. And it seems, Camilla, they're saying that foreign workers are anybody who doesn't hold a British passport. So you have to take some care there because obviously not everyone who is foreign, lots of people don't hold a British passport, not just because they're foreign. They say that would incentivise businesses hiring British workers.
That strikes me as slightly bizarre as a proposal. Second of all, if I were the Tories, I'm not advising them, but if they want to listen to my advice, you just say in response to this, sorry, let's just get this straight. Reform want to tax businesses more. Full stop. We've had Richard Tice and Nigel Farage banging on about the hike in corporation tax, banging on about small and medium-sized businesses being squeezed by a Conservative government, and you actually want to make their tax bills higher.
How much is this, Camilla, just what might be described? I don't mean this pejoratively, but you'll know what I mean. Is it being used as dog whistle? So, look, Reform are not going to be the next government of the United Kingdom. But sending this idea of tax foreign workers has a whiff, oddly, of that Gordon Brown famous phrase, British jobs for British workers. They're going to say, without firm and incredibly, it would be very controversial, action on immigration, we're just never going to bring the numbers down. Does that work for Conservative voters, who many of whom are so concerned about immigration?
I mean, you say dog whistle. That's a kind of negative spin.
Yeah,
it's red meat.
Right.
Like it's righty red meat. Okay. I am concerned about the levels of worklessness in this country, and I'm concerned that there are a load of vacancies that aren't being filled. And I can understand this idea of trying to incentivise companies to employ more British people, but there's a degree to which it's completely unrealistic, because whenever you and I go around our daily lives, we're often being served, helped, working alongside foreign workers. I get that they've excluded health and care workers. I mean, they should. My dad runs a nursing home. Most of the staff are from overseas, not just Europe, by the way, the Philippines and other countries which have a historically very good record on looking after the elderly. That's why Dad employs them. So are we both, I mean, what do you think about Gordon Brown saying British jobs for British workers?
I found that really hard. I find the tone of this, really interesting phrase that Tony Blair used, parties are always in love with their emotional impulses. And there's an emotional impulse on the right, which is control immigration. I have the emotional impulse, which is almost exactly in the opposite direction, and therefore I should be challenged on it. You know, my father was an immigrant. He's dead now, sadly, but he came from Sudan to work here in the 1960s, worked his whole career, or most of his career, in the NHS at Moorfields Eye Hospital. So as soon as I hear people saying control immigration, I have an emotional impulse, which is that's a bad idea, because open borders lead to greater economic growth. If we hadn't had immigration in this country over the past few years, we would have had no growth. Growth per capita has actually been stagnant for a number of years under this Conservative government. So immigration has given us some growth, and immigrants are net contributors to in tax. They pay in more in tax than they take out in benefits and other services. So I instinctively am pro-immigration, but when it comes to the Conservatives, immigration can be a very motivating issue to get a vote out. So I'm interested in not so much my reaction to this, because I am somebody who is instinctively pro-immigration and believes in open borders as much as the state can allow resources to support GPs and education and other things. But for the Conservatives, I can see why Richard Tice and Nigel Farage have gone for something like this, because what we've seen in the evidence of the public attitudes is that they do not believe that either party, Labour or the Conservatives, have got anything that will solve this problem.
I think there are several strands to why people are concerned about immigration on the right. There are those people that feel that the complexion of Britain has changed, that it's become more multicultural, they don't like it, they're quite parochial, and that's their positioning. I think there's also what I would call the Trevor Phillips position, which is that people don't really have a problem with immigrants. They've got a problem with the lack of infrastructure that has gone with it. So if you're going to take in 15 million people since 1997, not build enough schools, not build enough houses, not have enough GP places, not have enough dentists, then unfortunately people are going to come to resent those who have come in. I think that there are others who think that immigration is a great thing, that they want high-skilled workers from overseas. They see them in their hospitals, they see them in their hospitality venues. They love this sense of the immigrant that does well, you know, the kind of product of Rishi Sunak talked about this, right? His parents come to this country, they embrace everything that Britain gives them, they make something of their lives. The trouble with the mass immigration that's come in recent years is that some of those immigrants, particularly when it comes to kind of family members accompanying students, for instance, haven't actually worked. And I think people have a problem with that. And also I think there is an issue and a concern now around the integration. If there is, and this is the sort of right-wing Conservative position, it's the Suella Braverman point, that if you have mass immigration and people then go into different communities and just exist in silos and don't mix with others, that you then get the kind of, quotes, sectarianism that Nigel Farage talked about. And that conversation does appeal to a certain kind of voter.
How should Rishi Sunak respond? Or maybe he shouldn't respond, or maybe that is the response, is no response. Should he respond to what Reform is saying? Because it gets to the heart, doesn't it, Camilla, of something that we've spoken about on a number of occasions, which is the Conservatives need to protect their flank on the right, and they also need to pull back people who are flirting with voting Labour.
It's either no comment or it's a critical comment. I mean, Sunak can't have it both ways. He can't say, I won't debate Nigel Farage because he's never going to be Prime Minister and he's just, you know, irrelevant to my campaign, and then start reacting to everything that Reform says. On a wider issue, the right, we've been talking about the left and the problem that the left has with the left. The problem that the right has with the right doesn't just come from Reform. This is an interesting point, by the way, from Nigel Farage. He made it on Peston's ITV show last night. This idea, well, actually, when push comes to shove, if there's a Starmer government, then it will be Reform that will be the effective opposition, not the Tories.
The people that have come from Labour, through the gateway drug of UKIP, Brexit Party, voted for Boris, They're gone already. They will not vote Conservative. They have been betrayed on Brexit, on immigration, on so many things. Even if we stood aside completely from the election, those voters are not going back to the Conservatives. The election is over.
So as far as you're concerned, Labour's won.
It's over. It's over. It's done. It's over. I mean, we can all pretend there might be a contest, the polls might tighten. They won't. It's over. These people loathe the Conservatives. It's done. Our job, and, sadly, with 6 weeks rather than 6 months, as I'd rather planned and hoped to be part of, our job is to provide a voice of opposition to a Labour government with a big majority. And I'll tell you why I say this. Because the Conservatives will be in opposition, but they won't be the opposition. They're incapable. They're at war with each other. They're divided. They don't
The problem
stand.
with that analysis is that Nigel Farage is only talking about 20% of the electorate, and you don't win an election with the support of 20% of the electorate, who are very, very bothered by just the issues that Reform regularly highlight.
True. The other problem for the Conservatives isn't the opposition from Reform, but the opposition from within. Only this week I've had briefings from the pop cons, I've had briefings from the new cons, all of these right-wing caucuses who are fighting like rats in a sack. I want to send you our manifesto. I'm like, so much for unite or die. Surely you should just be backing one manifesto. So all of these groups are now making demands of the person writing the Tory manifesto to make sure that it's full-throatedly right-wing enough. I get that positioning. I get that our readers don't think that Rishi Sunak's offering is Conservative enough because it's been high tax, high spend, furlough money. I mean, Rishi Sunak, bless him, he still thinks he's going to be thanked for furlough money. No Conservative in the history of the world has ever been thanked for giving people money. OK? It's just such bad politics.
I think as well, this idea that if there is a 1997 type moment and Labour get in with a big majority, it will be wilderness on the Conservative side of the debate, and there must be a whole new generation. There will need to be a generational change. This idea that the Conservatives can keep spinning their wheels around the same subjects, which has been massively rejected by the public, if that is what happens on July the 4th, and the polls at the moment are saying that is what is happening. The whole debate for the public and for government will be about what is Labour doing. The Conservatives will go off, just as they did after 1997, into a sort of wilderness land where they'll be having these intense debates that the public will not be listening to.
Although, if things don't get better, to quote the Blairite anthem by D. Ream, OK, if things get really, really bad, then as we've witnessed across Europe and the rest of the world, you then get a full lurch to the right in opposition. So I get your point about, moderate politics winning the day, but you'll get more right-wing sentiment against the Labour Party if the Labour Party start taxing us to the pipsqueak, spending huge amounts of money, racking up debt, suggesting that women can have penises and all the other things that really annoy the right. Don't forget, by the way, Kamal, you're forgetting somebody who could be the linchpin of the right. And that is the popcon, the popular Conservative that is Liz Truss. Now, the former Prime Minister spoke to our very own Dominic Penner, he's our resident Daily Tea political stato, about her own ideology. Let's just hear how she positioned herself.
If Keir Starmer gets elected, the unelected bureaucracy will be turbocharged. They'll be given even more power. And you've got Sue Gray, who was previously the head of government ethics, now the Labour Party chief of staff. So you're going to see more of these powerful unelected officials stopping the real change that needs to happen in Britain. And what I would encourage people to do, and I would encourage Conservatives to do, is join the Conservative Party. Help the Conservative Party to change into a force that is going to take on this this very, very powerful state that we now have. They can join the Conservative Party, they can get themselves involved in selecting members of Parliament who actually believe in these ideas. This is why we set up the Popular Conservative movement, so that people can actually participate, because it is going to take the public to understand what the problems are, to participate in politics to actually change things.
I'm not sure that Liz Truss was convincing to herself during that.
She was trying
interview.
to say anti-growth coalition, and she forgot her own sort of attack line. On selections, by the way, I love this idea that Liz Truss thinks that voters are going to have control over who gets parachuted in at the last minute to Michael Gove's seat.
Can we just look back at a little bit of history as well, beyond that selections thing? The idea that you go to the electorate and you say, would you like some spam? And the electorate say to you, no, we don't like spam very much. We're going to vote for the other guy who's offering us eggs. And you come back to the electorate and say, OK, you didn't like the spam. We're going to give you double spam. It is what the left tried to do after 1979. They went from 1979, losing to Margaret Thatcher, to Michael Foot in 1983. So they went left. They thought, right, what the public wants is what they've just rejected. And I can see it as night follows day. The Conservatives, if they lose on July the 4th, and this is advice I am giving them, if you go right and say, OK, double spam, even though you've rejected it, it won't work for them.
Should we explain what spam is?
I'm not that old, but it's a tinned meat.
Have you ever eaten spam?
I don't think I have, no.
No.
But
At one point, we shall sit down for spam and eggs.
Yes.
Let's also just have a little bit of
I think
readers.
I'll just show my age a bit there,
I know,
Camilla.
to be fair,
I'm not
I
a
know-
war baby, just to be clear to
Can
everybody.
I just say, I used to love a spam fritter at school.
Oh, you see,
so,
exactly.
you know,
Same
I'm with
there.
you on that one.
Thank you.
Now, during our interview with Rishi Sunak, there was a part where I did zone out a bit. I felt like I just entered a Comic Con with two George Lucas freaks. I like Star Wars, but clearly not as much as you and the
No,
Prime
not
Minister.
like a proper fan.
And obviously we're interested in the socials, and we have a look at the amount of views that they're clocking up. Kamal, give us the stats on the Star Wars clip and just explain what was discussed.
So on the Star Wars clip alone, so we ask all of our brilliant guests on the Daily Tea, we ask them how do they take their tea and who would they like a cup of tea with. And Rishi Sunak said George Lucas, the director of the original Star Wars movies. I don't want to bore you, so I won't go on any more about Star Wars itself. But that clip of him talking about his favourite Star Wars movies has, what we like to say, gone a bit viral on socials. We've really now got 1 million views of those social media posts of the Daily Tea podcast interview with the Prime Minister.
And even I remember which ones he liked. He liked Empire Strikes Back and he liked Rogue One. And even I remember his favourite two films. It was The Empire Strikes Back and then it was Rogue One. Let's read out some of these comments are so brilliant. Ryan, astronomically rare, Rishi Sunak. James, bro gave the most standard opinion. To be fair, I agree with that because everyone says Empire Strikes Back, don't they? Ellis, didn't realise he was chill like that. You read some, Kamal.
Yes, and then I love Louis, who says, I hate to say that I agree completely with Rishi Sunak for one time and one time only. And then he says, and then Daff Williams has said, may just vote for him. A very good and educated take.
Yeah, but on the other hand, Liam remains unconvinced. You can like Road One, but that doesn't win you my vote.
No, Liam's a very sensible person. I think I shared with you, Camilla, the clip on Star Wars was one of the few things that my son has shared from the podcast on his socials. So that shows that it's got cut through. Rishi Sunak has got cut through with Generation Z. Who knew?